New videos every day.
I like to know things.
So I want to talk today a little bit about truth and common knowledge, what people consider to be true, right? Because if there's one thing that history has ever dictated, it's that whatever people think is true, whatever is common knowledge, whatever people consider as acceptable, is eventually overturned, right? And I'll give you several examples of that. You've probably heard, of this mental condition called hysteria, right? Well, the origin of the idea of hysteria is Greek. It comes from the same root word, hystar, which meant womb, that we get the word hysterectomy, right? So the Greeks actually believed that hysteria was a mental illness that only women got, and it was because of their womb. The word literally means wandering womb. Now, you hear that and you may think, that is freaking insane to think that somebody's hysterical because of their womb. But that idea was held on to all the way until about the year 1900, where there were still psychiatrists treating women by applying pressure to their womb in order to cure hysteria. And we also have a word like lunatic, right? Of course, a lunatic, luna is the word for the moon, right? So the belief was that people were mentally ill because of the moon or the effect of the moon on them. Now, probably the most tried example that you'll hear, and you hear it all the time, is the idea that the world was flat. Interestingly enough, the Europeans are really the only culture that totally got into this idea. Some of the Hindus thought it was actually kind of bowl-shaped. It wasn't really flat, but it was a bowl because, the water had to kind of stay in some way, right? At various times, the Arabic culture, the Egyptian culture, the early Persian culture, the Babylonian culture, the Mayans and the Aztecs all understood that the world was actually round, right? But for years and years, the Europeans thought that the world was flat. And eventually, somebody stepped forth and they challenged that idea and they said, no, the world is actually round. And, the public railed against it. They didn't believe it. The Europeans used to think that the universe revolved around the earth, right? And so you had Galileo, he came along, he said, no, that's not the way it worked. And what happened to him? He got imprisoned, right? Another guy, Socrates, Greek philosopher, he had some radical ideas and he ended up poisoning himself, or being required to be executed as a result of his radical ideas. So constantly we see that advances are made in the knowledge of mankind by one or two people who disagrees with the current worldview. They come forth, they say, hey, this isn't true, even though everybody thinks it's true. They're persecuted for it. Sometimes they're imprisoned for it. Sometimes they're actually murdered for it. And then several years later, the world or society catches up to their particular view, right? Now, I see a lot of these guys on YouTube talking about evolution, talking about the Big Bang, talking about, physics, astronomy theory, all this kind of stuff, right? But you got to kind of ask yourself, are we as a society, have we really figured everything out? Have we really figured out genetics, right? Have we really figured out, things like the universe are made out of, 20% dark matter and 70% dark energy, are all these ideas right? How many ideas do we currently in society have that are like flat earth ideas? How many of them are just bullshit? Now I tend to think that there are probably a lot of them. You take our understanding of dark matter, the universe and gravity. I don't think it's going to hold water for another 40 years, That to me is one of the funniest flat earth ideas, this concept that, in order for our understanding of gravity, in order for our equation of gravity to be true, right, then there must be 90% of the universe is unaccountable for, so it must be 20% of invisible matter and 70% invisible energy. I don't buy it. I think probably our understanding of gravity is incorrect. And if you really look at it, we're in this very, very tiny, tiny little speck of a planet, which is, besides Earth and maybe Mars a little bit and the moon, we have not been able to experience or measure gravity in the rest of the universe, So for us to assume that by looking at this minute speck of the universe, which is incalculably large, and to assume that we have the universal laws figured out is, really egotistical. So I don't really buy the whole dark matter thing. It's literally somebody going, we're trying to balance an equation, and the equation doesn't balance, and so we have to add something over on this side of the equation to make it balance. And in order to balance, they originally added some figure like 20% dark matter on one side. And then that was accepted for a while in the scientific community. That was like, oh, that's a standard model, it's 20%, And then later on, some more observations were made, and it turned out the equation would no longer balance. And so they went, oh, well, if it's not dark matter, well, there must be this thing called dark energy. And so they add this dark energy thing, and then they go, to make this thing balance, it's going to be another 70% of the universe is dark energy, right? Well, I'm sorry. The most likely explanation is we simply do not really understand gravity completely yet. So how many ideas are flat earth ideas? For the longest time, people thought that, these various races of people were genetically inferior. Actually, you had two kind of arguments. You had the religious argument and the science argument.